I think that my examples before were a little bit simple, nice but simple, but this is a complicated case of patronage that I want to discuss with you all, centering around the veneration of the finger bone of the Buddha. How many people here have been to Fallen Monastery? Yeah, that's what I thought. Cool. That's an interesting adventure, isn't it? Yeah. What can we say? Modern Buddhism meets the state-sponsored tourism, meets the archaeology, meets tour guide, meets, yeah. Okay. Here are some things I want to highlight. Types of court patronage that are involved in the case of the Fallen relics. I have them listed out here as 3. There's probably a lot more than that, but let's just start with these. Okay, first type. The Fallen patronage around the veneration of the relic of the Buddha incorporates objects sponsored by earlier patrons. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about patronage. Patrons, now see I'm popping my P's here. Patrons relate to earlier patrons. For example, probably as time goes on in this series, you're going to hear about Ashoka, Emperor Ashoka, quite a lot. Later patrons relate to earlier patrons. Number 2, commissioning works for a collective project. Patrons work together oftentimes. In fact, I was just asked about the Songjingfei's shrine. Would you have to be wealthy to sponsor a shrine? No. If you belong to a group of people, say 100, 200 people put their 50 cents together, you could come up with the price for a shrine. So that's another thing. Group patronage is another key thing to think about that you will undoubtedly be learning about more as the series goes on. And then thirdly, donating personal objects. Now, we talked a little bit about that, I guess, in Song Jingfei's case. It was her personal jewelry and clothes. We could call Baijui's donation a personal object, although it was clearly cash in the form of an object, right? But the donation of personal objects is a key component of the Fallen relic group. So where are we? We are, oops, no, back. This, I love this catalog. I have this at the bottom here. It's on your study guide as well. It has essays by various different experts in various aspects of Buddhism and archaeology and that sort of thing. And then it has really good entries on a lot of the individual pieces. Now, of course, no single exhibition that goes to the West has all the pieces from Fallen. So, for example, if you want to see some more of them, I also have the Gilded Dragons catalog down there on your study guide as well, and that they got some things that, being British, that these people didn't get. So you kind of have to put it together. Now we can go to the map. Okay, we were here in Luoyang last, and now we're going back to Xi'an. The Fallen Monastery is about, what is that, about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive west of Xi'an right now. And the Tang Dynasty pagoda that was there on the grounds of Fallen is long gone. It was wooden and didn't last very long probably. And what was there up until 1981 is a Ming Dynasty pagoda, brick pagoda, of no particular distinction, wasn't architecturally famous or anything like that, until a rainy day in 1987. Well, you just can't leave something like that standing around, you know. So, this was taken down. 1981. Did I say 1981? That's when it collapsed. 1981 collapsed, deemed unsafe, had to be taken down. However, even though the pagoda was no special thing, everybody in this area knew that what this pagoda had held, what was underneath this, or so they imagined, what was underneath this was probably the most famous relic of the Buddha ever believed to have been on Chinese soil. So, taking down the remains of this pagoda was nothing. That was the beginning. The real experience was excavating the basement. Okay, so now we are looking at, this is obviously where the base of the pagoda was originally. And what they discovered underneath there was not just a simple square chamber or box or anything as would be seen in a normal pagoda. Rather, they came upon a multi-chambered crypt underneath the pagoda. And ultimately, in their search to find the finger bone relic of the Buddha that was in there, it became clear that there were actually 4 of them in the various chambers that were underneath this thing. Now, the issue of the real one we can get to momentarily. Anyway, when this was excavated in 1987, there was tremendous world interest about this. This was believed by believers to be a genuine bodily relic of Shakyamuni Buddha. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing. So it was in the papers and on TV and just a very, very big deal. So we're going to do a little sketch of the history of this object in the Tang Dynasty. Over the course of the Tang, this relic, this finger bone of the Buddha, believed, of course, to possess tremendous power, was taken out of the monastery, handled with, of course, great ritual care, and transported to either Luoyang, which we know was the eastern capital, we heard Bai Jui say that, the eastern capital, or to Chang'an, the western capital. This is modern Xi'an. Taken from the monastery, transported very specially to the palace, and there it was welcomed throughout the city. As soon as it came into the suburbs of the city, there were altars and shrines and banners and things set up by the ruler that were along an imperial way, and the whole thing was carried into the city, and there were guards and flags and parasols and the whole bit for miles as the thing proceeded its way into the palace. So tremendous pomp and circumstance, very expensive public ceremony to welcome this thing. And that's not even the private stuff that was done for it, which is what remains, which we will look at today, but I don't have any flags and banners from the 7th century to show you, sadly. Okay, for the first time, it was brought to the palace in Luoyang. Translation is the term used for a relic, for it to be translated from one venue to the other. Brought to Luoyang in 660 for the first time. This, of course, is the year that Emperor Gaozong's health began to fail. He had what historians think was probably a stroke at that time, and if you know your history, this is the beginning of when Empress Wu began to kind of take control of government affairs and moved on toward her eventual rule of China. I don't know that the fingerbone relic did much for his health. It was eventually translated back to the pagoda at Famansa. Then again, 705, the second time it came. Now, 705, of course, Empress Wu was on her deathbed in Luoyang. And she asked for it to be brought to her, possibly to revive her, give her immortality. I don't know what her thought was. Seems to have something to do with the notion of healing. The relic then came 3 other times over the course of the 8th and 9th century, and then the last, last time it was translated from the monastery. It came to the imperial palace in Chang'an by order of Emperor Yizong. He's up here. It was arrived there on the 8th of May in 873. He was ill. I think you can see from the dates up on the screen here that did not save him. He was not revived by the presence of the relic of the Buddha. He died, and his successor, his 11-year-old son, succeeded him and became known as Emperor Shizong. And he returned the relic, along with a bunch of other stuff, which is why we have this today, to Fallen Monastery in 874. At that point, in 874, the crypt was sealed. It was packed full of all this stuff. Crypt was sealed, and it was not, of course, reopened until 1987. So that would be well over 1,000 years later. I like this drawing. This is a kind of a cutaway view diagram of the crypt. It essentially mimics the structure of a royal tomb. Now, you probably know that everything having to do with the Buddha is inherently royal, because he was, of course, a royal prince, and he is treated as that ever after. So it's not too surprising that anything related to him would be palace-like or relating to palace behaviors. But there's also a feeling that even a powerful relic is a bodily part. And for that to be buried in a kind of a crypt-like arrangement is only appropriate. Let me point out to you what we're looking at here. Okay, if you would be standing up here and walk down the stairs, very typical, palace tomb architecture, come down a series of steps as you go down into the earth. It levels off, doorway here, a long entrance corridor, again, very similar to imperial tomb structure. And then originally there were two large stone steles. These are horizontal slabs of stone that are carved with long inscriptions. I'm going to say something more about that, but I want you to just have in your mind where those were originally. Even though they were inscribed, they were used to seal the doorway into the chambers. Then we have, marked as number 4 here, the front chamber, the middle chamber, the back chamber or rear chamber, and then the hidden compartment. Yeah. So this was down here underneath the back wall of the back of this. Okay. As it turned out, there were reliquaries, nested reliquaries, in each of those 3 rooms that contained a finger bone relic, and there was a nested reliquary in the hidden compartment that also contained a finger bone relic. Okay, now we're going to look down into the crypt. This is my picture. Okay, so I'm crouching down at the doorway. You probably all did this too, to peer into this thing. And here's the long entranceway, and then you're going back into the chambers, and I think that's probably the back wall back there. This, of course, has all been rebuilt. You saw the picture I showed you with the whole thing, the whole top blown off. That's how you do archaeological work. So this has all been put back together. And what they have done is, these are the 2 stone slabs, the 2 inscribed slabs that were blocking the doorway. So they have moved those out to the side. Let me indicate. Here we go. This one over here is an inventory. Hallelujah. It's a big old list of everything that went in there, who donated it, when. I mean, it's fantastic. Great work of bureaucracy there, really great. And then another fantastic document on the other side, the history of the fingerbone relic in the Tang Dynasty. So that turned out to tell people some things they didn't know about too. All right, the inventory lists 2,499 objects, including over 700 pieces of clothing and bedclothes made out of very luxurious textiles. Now, not surprisingly, those did not fare very well underground for over 1,000 years. So it's kind of obvious where certain piles of nondescript, vegetable matter were probably the textiles, but I can't show you any of those. Let's see, I do have a picture of one of the rooms. This is the middle chamber as it was kind of in the excavation process. So stuff like this, piles of this, sometimes these are decayed boxes and textiles and other things that didn't fare so well. The stuff in stone and the stuff in gilded silver, however, did do pretty well. The inventory lists 118 offering vessels and other objects made of gold and silver. And in fact, there are a couple of gold things, but there's not that much solid gold. That just is not particularly an interest for this area. Most of it is gilded silver. So it's silver that has a lot of gold laid over it. Sometimes it looks gold, but it's actually, the vessel is silver. Some of these, we have some images of these. On the left here, I'm trying to put these size proportional to each other. So the jar on the left is about 9.5 inches high, and the pitcher on the right is about 8 inches high. So I'm trying to give you these in kind of size proportion here. So we tend to think of a pitcher as being large and a jar being small, but in this case it's not so. The jar on the left, there were 2 of these. It's kind of unclear what they exactly were supposed to hold. Various scholars have come up with different theories. One would be tea. Another idea was incense. A third idea is salt. Salt was used to flavor tea in the Tang Dynasty, so that was actually a big component of tea drinking at that time. So those are some theories, but apparently there was nothing in the jar to test. The designs on the exterior of both of the jars are very traditional narrative and decorative designs. So we have some kind of a story here. There's a fellow seated on a mat underneath a tree, and a younger looking man is turning back toward him. He's got a kind of looks like he's got his musical instrument and a sack across his back or something like that. They are looking right at each other. I mean, there's plainly a conversation going on here in some kind of story, but I don't know what it is. And the rest of the decor on here, there are deer up here, and there's some ducks down here and stuff. Is not Buddhist. It's a very long way of saying it's not Buddhist imagery at all. So this is one interesting aspect of the stuff that was put into this crypt, is that some of it is patently non-Buddhist. However, the piece on the right is extremely Buddhist. It's got in these roundels on the side, it's got crossed vajras, which will tell you right away that this is probably esoteric Buddhism that we're talking about here. These pitchers held scented water that was used in special ceremonies of sprinkling and anointing. One of these ceremonies was done actually to the emperor as a believer. The idea is that the disciple, the acolyte, comes and goes through an elaborate ceremony in which a specific esoteric deity is installed in their heart. And part of this entire ritual of this happening is the anointing of the disciple's head with the scented water in one of these pitchers. So this is profoundly Buddhist object and very much at the heart of rituals that would have been done at the palace. The inventory also tells us that there were 13 pieces of Islamic glassware. Again, size so difficult to tell on these massive images on the wall. 6 inches diameter for most of these. They're not that big. Again, speculation on where these really came from. Some scholars say Iran, Nishapur, Iran, which would make this Persian. Samarra in modern Iraq is another possibility for this kind of glass. It is incised rather freely, and then gilded, has gold into it. Some of it's rubbed off. Foreign-made glassware was a luxury item, of course, in this time period. And what does this have to do with Buddhism? It's a luxurious thing to offer. Let's put it that way, to the Buddha. The inventory also lists something called secret color. Secret color ceramics. Now, this term, secret color, was known for a long, long time. It's mentioned in poems and literature and that kind of thing. It was the top type of yueware that was made during the Tang Dynasty, and it was prized for its jade-like appearance. And you can see, of course, it has that nice glowing green. So historians of ceramics knew this term, but had never seen any kind of self-identified object that said, "Hi, I'm made of, misu, secret color glaze." However, the inventory specifically identifies these pieces as being made with secret color glaze. This piece is about 6 inches across. The water bottle is about 8.5 inches high. Okay, let's talk about what's in there in a large sense. The inventory, if you read it, is grouped into 3 types of artifacts, 3 groups of donations that all came together in the final sealing of the crypt. Group number 1, we're going to start with the oldest ones first. Group number 1, antique objects that came with the relic from the monastery to the palace I'm going to show you two of these, and then there are others I think that probably didn't survive. One of the things listed on the inventory is an embroidered skirt that was offered by Empress Wu. I don't believe that survived being made of fabric. Now, I don't know if she offered that in 705 or if she offered it in 660 when her husband was still alive. Nevertheless, even if she offered it in 705, that would make it what? 160 some years old at the time that it came back. So we have antique objects. Group number 2. The clothing, secret color ceramics, and ritual objects in gilded silver given by Emperor Yizong and several of the monks of the palace chapel. Now understand, these are not just random monks from anywhere in China. These are guys who are already installed in the palace chapel. They are, you could say, a personal spiritual advisor to the emperor and then again to his son. Men whose job it is to be there in the palace and to administer these esoteric rituals and to be in charge of all that. Okay, so that is the second group, and here is our third group. Clothing, bedclothes, glass dishes, and vessels and objects in gilded silver given by Emperor Shizong. Now this is the 11-year-old boy that succeeds. If you're like me, it's a little bit difficult to keep Yizong and Shizong straight in your mind. I have to continually recheck that, right? Okay, so Yizong was the dad. Shizong is the son, the 11-year-old boy who succeeds his father. So all of these things, like the Persian dish that I showed you, etc., all of that stuff was then given by the child when all of the stuff was sent back to Fallen Monastery to be re-enshrined, interred into the crypt in 874, which was then, of course, sealed up until modern times. Now, representative of the objects that were made of the second group, I'm going to show you what I think is probably considered the star piece of the whole thing, but maybe that's just because I'm into sculpture. Maybe other people think that the ceramics were the star. I don't know. Okay, the objects that were made for the veneration of the relic in the palace, this particular group. One of the most amazing pieces is this silver monstrance in the form of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, or Guanyin in Chinese. He is kneeling on a lotus throne and holding up a lotus leaf-shaped tray right up in here to bear the relic for its worship, its adoration. If you include the lotus throne and the Bodhisattva all the way up to the tippy top of his crown, the whole piece is about 15 inches high. It's hard to see here, but he has blue hair, which is, of course, scripturally appropriate. You know, the Buddha has blue-black hair. He has blue hair, and he has a, this is actually gilt silver. See, this is an example. It looks like it's gold, doesn't it? But it's actually silver with gilding over it. He has a pearl-studded crown, and in fact, you can see he has got pearls all over him. And they have estimated that originally, obviously there's been some decay there, there were originally 460 pearls draped all over this figure. This too, like our Han Dynasty lamp girl, I should call her the candle girl, lamp girl, is made in parts. The arms and hands are separate. The crown is a separate piece, and the tray is a separate piece. All right, what we're going to do in this next image is show you what might have been on there when this thing was being worshipped in the palace. This is the rock crystal reliquary that came with the relic from the monastery to the palace. Here is a picture of the fingerbone relic that was inside of it. And my guess, I don't know, but based on the shape of this, which is rectangular, and I'll show it to you in more detail in a sec, based on its rectangular shape, I think it would admit this thing, which is, small. And my guess would be that in the veneration of this relic, that it would not be exposed. I don't see that happening. I don't see the bone proper just being plunked onto the tray. You know what I mean? I can't envision that in that kind of atmosphere. So I'm thinking that it would have remained inside of the crystal casket, and the casket would have been set upon the tray. But of course, I wasn't there, and I don't know. Okay, about the tray. This thing is so fancy that it actually has a cover. That's what this is. This is a cover that has chains that are chained to the lotus petal part of this thing. So this comes off. And in fact, that tray might have come off too. I don't know. And maybe this was set directly onto the lotus leaf. I don't know. It may have been set onto the tray. Okay, onto the tray though. Here's the tray popped off of there. And yes, it is elaborately inscribed. Great. Love that. The inscription tells us that this was actually made and given to the emperor, the gentleman that had the relic brought there. That's Yizong, right? Have I got that right? Okay. Given to Emperor Yizong in anticipation of the translation of the relic to the palace. It was actually made in 871. 2 years before the relic got there. So clearly, the bringing of this relic was in long-term planning before it finally occurred. So this piece was made in 871 on the emperor's birthday. It's dated to his birthday. Wow, what a terrific birthday gift, right? As you've created this amazingly sumptuous object. The thing that you do, of course, on someone's birthday is you wish them long life, which this does, by the way. It says here that the Bodhisattva will be forever offering up the true body, the relic of the Buddha, forever offering that up with the prayer that long life, eternal life, health and healing for the emperor. Okay, so this was sponsored by a monk of the palace chapel, a guy named Dung Yi, who we don't know anything about otherwise, but that makes it very clear that the planning for this was at least 2 years in advance. I don't know how long it would take to make an object of this extraordinary craftsmanship, but it'd be a while. So all of this is a long time in the planning to bring this to him. And I like that it was given to him on his birthday, because I think that is a key indicator that this whole thing is about healing and about long life. As we will see, we know it didn't really work, but that's what it's about. I want to look at his throne in some detail, because this too is in parts. So let's go down to the base of the throne. We'll start at the base and work our way up. The design imagery on this throne is purely from esoteric Buddhism. Esoteric Buddhism, as you can guess from the word esoteric, is a form of hidden Buddhism. It is not a public form of Buddhism. It does not involve public preaching or mass acts of salvation or anything like that. It's a complicated form of Buddhism that involves the visualization of and identification with specific esoteric deities. And there is a world of them. There are Buddhas, there are Bodhisattvas, there are guardians, there are all kinds of beings in these worlds. And these worlds are organized in mandala. So what you have in esoteric Buddhism is usually a very large surface, be it a mural or be it a silk wall hanging or whatever, in which the dozens and dozens and dozens of deities of a particular world, in this case the diamond world, that particular world, they are lined up in geometric relation to one another. And part of the ritual of participating in esoteric Buddhism is to go through this mandala and to focus on each deity there, be it a big Buddha in the center or some little bodhisattva or wrathful manifestation or somewhere, to focus on each one of these And then, having memorized all of this, you are to utter the name of this divinity. You are to speak secret syllables. You are to do secret hand gestures, all these things to form an identification with that deity and to internalize that. And it can take hours or days or whatever to go through an esoteric mandala to get all of that inside you. Needless to say, this is not a religion of the people. Yeah. This is a religion for somebody who has a lot of time on their hands and a lot of people to help them, and of course that would be the emperor. So let's look at just a little of this. On the base are these Vijayarajas, wisdom kings. They are often shown in a flaming mandorla or body halo here. They are holding weapons. They are threatening menacingly. But as Jennifer said in her introduction, they're not really angry at you. It's defending the Dharma. So we have, there are, 8 of these in all. You're able to see only 4. Of course, the others are on the back side. And then on the lotus petals up above them, each of these signs here is a, what do we call Sanskrit? Syllables? Yeah, okay. A syllable in Sanskrit. And they are called seed syllables because they stand for the name of one of the esoteric deities. So it's just like a single syllable standing for the whole word or name there. Those probably represent the 8 great Bodhisattvas, who are a set of powerful deities within esoteric Buddhism. I'm going to go up to the stem here. You can just see this guy right here. This is a Lokapala, a directional guardian of the Dharma. There are, of course, 4 of those. Makes perfect sense. And my next image, I'm going to go up a little bit, and there's the stem again. There's our Lokapala down below. Another one here as well. And now this is the upper part of the throne on which the Bodhisattva is actually perched. And on here we see Bodhisattva figures. These, of course, are no longer any kind of wrathful manifestation with the flames and all that, but rather are benign, and so they have very smooth, just glowing head halos and mandorlas around them. There are in all 16, and they represent another esoteric set of deities, the 16 great Bodhisattvas. Now, this wouldn't truly be an esoteric object if there weren't something hidden in it. Yeah. So we're going to take this upper part of the throne, we're going to pop it off, and I'm going to show you what is right in here underneath. Right here. This, of course, is obscured from view when the whole thing is put together. So what does this look like? It looks a lot like Sanskrit. And these are seed syllables in Sanskrit that represent the 5 Buddhas of the Diamond World Mandala. They symbolize Mahavarochana in the center and then the 4 directional Buddhas around him. So in a esoteric context, they are hidden under there, but of course that diminishes their power in no way. They are emanating that power up and through the entire assembly, and of course they are emanating out the mandala, which holds now in its center the relic. So it's a whole world of power around this relic of the Buddha. Okay, I'm going to go back to my diagram because I want to talk about reliquaries next. Okay, so we've already gone down in here. There was nested reliquaries in here, nested reliquaries in here, nested reliquaries in here, and then at the very end, the hidden compartment. Okay, we could argue all day long about which one was the real relic. Who knows, right? My feeling is that this one in the hidden compartment was the real relic for 2 reasons. One, it is in the deepest part of the shrine. Is this not true of every religion in the world? The further back you go, the more sacred the space. You name it, Hindu temples, Christian churches, whatever. The further back in the thing you go, the deeper you go in there, that's the more sacred space, the sanctum sanctorum. So I think that. I also think because it was hidden, That's so appropriate. It was hidden in that compartment. But another reason that I think that it may have the real finger bone inside it is because of the nested reliquaries that are around it. Because those reliquaries, I'm going to go through these in detail here, that set of reliquaries encapsulates the whole history of the veneration of this relic throughout the Tang Dynasty. It also encapsulates the three types of materials, the three groups of donations that were found inside the crypt. So to me, it's got everything. And that's one reason I like it for the real finger bone. But there's a lot of argumentation about that and what that all means. We'll talk about that another time. Here we go. Let's start with the outer casket. So I'm going to start here. I'll just give you a picture of this. I'm going to start with the outer box, and we're going to go increasingly inward to the finger bone, of course, is at the center of all of this. So I will describe these pieces, but don't worry. At the end, I'm going to bring them all back in a great lineup, and you can see how they relate to each other. Okay, so we'll just start out with the outer one. The outer casket is made of iron. I think it's amazing that it survived all this time. It's clearly, heavily rusted, but it is, there it is, made of iron. This is one of the antiques. This came with the relic from the monastery. Hence, if it had been part of the very first relic translation in 660, this object would be over 200 years old by this time. Okay, what's inside of that? Immediately inside that is this amazing gilded silver box. It is engraved on the exterior with images of the Buddhas of the Diamond World Mandala. So you have the four directional Buddhas on the four sides, very appropriate, and Mahavarochana up there on the top. They are, of course, accompanied by their various Bodhisattvas. We have lots of Vajra imagery, water bottles for ceremonies, and everything about it is thoroughly esoteric. This piece of the nest has an inscription on the base that says it was donated by another monk of the palace chapel, a guy named Zhiying. He made it, it says, for Emperor Yizong in 871. So that means this piece is one that was produced, patronized, if I may use that word, by a monk of the palace chapel and given to the emperor prior to the arrival of the relic. So it was ready for part of that, worshiping, the veneration of the piece there. Okay, size-wise, let me give you a little size. This box is 6 3/4 inches on each side. So that's the size we're talking about. Third casket. Okay, here we go. This is kind of a little sad story here. Yeah. And the Chinese archaeologists are just honest enough to tell you it was ruined during the process of excavation, and I think that's could be commended to be honest about that. Yeah, this is obviously wooden. It's sandalwood, and it has silver fittings on it. It has silver corners, a silver lock, and that kind of thing. Now this was listed in the inventory, as so much else was. But what's interesting is that the inventory tells us when it was made and who it was made by. There's nothing on the piece that says that, but the inventory tells this, so this is very useful. The inventory says there was a sandalwood box with silver edging, which this corresponds to, which was added by Emperor Shizong, that's the boy, the 11-year-old boy, added by Emperor Shizong for the re-enshrinement in 874. So see, we've got one of each kind of thing here so far. Now, inside the ruined sandalwood box, was this piece that you've already seen. This is shaped like a coffin, which is appropriate. This is bodily remains inside of it, shaped like a traditional Chinese coffin. You're all invited to come to the Nelson Atkins and look at the sarcophagus there, if you don't believe me. Made of crystal. And as you can see on top of it, attached is a very large sapphire and a topaz stuck onto the top of it. Now, this too was brought with the relic from the monastery, and hence may be as old as 660. You can kind of see, because it is crystal, it is somewhat transparent, you can kind of see the last reliquary inside it, which is white jade. There we go. That's actually the final reliquary in which is the finger bone of the Buddha. Size frame 2.25 inches long. So small. It was originally wrapped in gold-lined embroidered silk. How do we know that? You see that stuff on top there? Still little bits of the gold stuck to it after all this time. And this is really typical, in palace cultures, anything of value. Oftentimes anything that the emperor is going to touch is going to be wrapped in expensive textiles and shielded in that fashion. Okay, this piece, the final innermost white jade casket, was also sponsored by the boy, Shizong, in 874 for the re-enshrinement, the return to the pagoda. Now, I promised you I'd bring them all back. So there they are. So this set just really encapsulates for me how this was all put together, and it's almost kind of dizzying to think about what is where when. In reality, the first object that came into the palace was this gilded silver box, right, which was made ahead of the thing coming. So that was the first thing that arrived there. And then when the relic came in 873, then the ancient iron box and the antique crystal casket came with the relic. So those were the next things to be at the palace. And then finally, for the return of the thing to the pagoda, you have the ruined sandalwood box and the white jade casket. Now, it's 12:15. I could show you a couple of tea items really quick if you'd like, and then we could have some questions. You want to see some tea things? Okay, everybody loves tea. Okay, also in here, and this was news to me too. I learned so much reading about this. I had no idea about the role of tea in Buddhist worship. I didn't know that making and offering tea in front of the Buddhist icons was a big deal, but it is a big deal. And the site had a number of amazing things in it that probably were used in rituals in front of the relic. So this very wonderful tea was made and offered in front of the relic in the palace chapel. This, speaking of patronage, let's get back to that topic. This is yet another kind of thing. This doesn't have anything to do with all of the stuff we've just been talking about centered on the relic. This object, gilded silver basket, coin pattern lattice, was sent to court as a tribute item from a guy who was a governor way down south in modern Guangxi province. So this object was sent in by an official as a way to, send in tribute money. It's a form of money in a way, gold, and but then became incorporated in this worship ritual in front of this relic. So interesting. This basket was probably used to hold roasted cakes of tea. Another cool object is this tortoise container. Obviously, the back shell is a lid, it comes off, and it probably held powdered tea. Now, in Tang times that they had their tea a lot more like Japanese tea ceremony is today, and not just like, Lipton's what we do. How could I characterize Chinese tea culture as Lipton? That's really wrong. Okay, and I told you about the salt, too. So some of the other objects in the crypt were salt cellars. Isn't this neat? This is little, about 2.5 inches high, and it held salt that you could put in your tea to flavor that. This was donated by a monk of the palace chapel, and so this probably was all going on, all this fancy tea offering. And I'll show you one more tea thing, and then we'll go to the Q&A. The last group of things that I want to show you, this is so interesting to me. All of this other stuff that I've shown you has been stuff pretty much made for this relic and made for the veneration of it in part of this whole centuries-long process. But as part of the last group of things that were included, that were put into the crypt, were things that were not created for the relic and obviously had nothing to do with it originally, but were probably used in the palace chapel, and that may be why they were sent back with all this stuff. I have a feeling that everything that was used around this relic was just scooped up and taken back there, and all of it was put in there forever. Anyway, here's some of the other things. This is a tea grinder or mortar. Again, gilt silver. It has a wonderful inscription on it, ever so helpful. It says on it, Wuge, fifth brother. And we know from history that this is the baby name for the boy, Emperor Shizong. He had this tea grinder. There were other items here that had the same inscription on them. And what happened to my sieve? Come back. Well, doesn't that beat all? You're going to have to look at the side of it. I'm so sorry. This is the bottom of a tea sieve. Once you grind up the tea leaves, you have to kind of sieve it to get the fine powdery stuff that you can drink. This had the inscription, his baby name on it as well, and this wonderful inscription on the bottom that tells exactly where it was made. Produced by the Yuan, which was the Eunuch Staffed Craft Institute in the Daming Palace. These were made in 869 for this child who would then become the emperor and who would then send all of this, he'd be the one to send all of this stuff of his father's back to the crypt. And let's see if I can have my last slide, please. Thank you. Look at the imagery on this. You have flying horses and clouds. The imagery on the tea sieve, which we will never see now, had immortals flying on cranes. This is not Buddhist imagery. So what you have is a bunch of tea-making implements that belong to this little boy, which then, for whatever reason, he had sent back with all the other stuff. So maybe it was seen as part of all of that. Maybe he wanted some of his own personal things to be sent back with this thing that mattered so much to his father. Maybe he was making his own donation of something that was personal to him that he could give back. But I guess this makes me think, bringing this back to Song Jing Fei, it's so fascinating to me that so many of the amazing acts of patronage in traditional China were produced by people who were 11, 12, 13 years old. I think that's kind of cool. Thank you so much for listening.